Hello platform, it's Rowan, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about the fantasy genre. So the reason why we wanted to talk about this is because of a book that I'm sure you already have heard of if you have watched our video about the big new releases coming up this year. It's Beasts of Prey. So this book is actually coming out next month, so very, very soon, but it is available to pre-order now. I will leave a link to that and all of the books that I talk about today in the description. It's been described as a mix between The Gilded Ones and Shadow and Bone. And for those of you who like a good Netflix adaptation, there is one in the works. So normally when an author writes a book, the publisher will buy that book, and then if the book does well, they might say, oh, we want more in this series. So when a book hasn't even been published yet and it's already confirmed for a trilogy, it's going to be good. So the book is set in this magical world inspired by Pan-African mythology. It's about two teenagers from very different worlds. The first is essentially paying off her family's debts by looking after these extremely dangerous mythological creatures in this place called the Night Zoo. The other is the son of a decorated hero who is on the precipice of his big last trial, big rite to become a warrior. But some stuff going on with the Night Zoo means that is no longer possible and the two are going to be thrust together. Unless they can work together to defeat the monster which is plaguing their city, the outlook for both of them is pretty bleak. I still haven't managed to get my hands on a copy of this and it is driving me wild, and so I thought today that I would talk a little bit about some fantasy YA books which are already out and that you can already enjoy before you get your hands on Beasts of Prey. So the first book I want to talk about is Riverkeep by Martin Stewart. So this is the story of this family who has long been the keepers of this dangerous and treacherous river. So they are the ones who break up ice to allow ships to go through. They're the ones who pull bodies out of the river when it takes its victims. Our main character, Wal, is dreading the day that he needs to take over from his father and become the river keeper once he comes of age. But one day, while recovering the body of a drowned man, Wal's father is pulled under, and when he comes back up, he's not himself anymore. He's been possessed, and Wal suddenly finds himself becoming the river keeper and also trying to figure out how to help his dad. He hears about a cure to help his father, but that cure and the way to get it is going to be a dangerous and epic quest. He has to journey down this river that his family has always been the stewards of, but have never explored themselves, and it is a dangerous task. I feel like this book has flown slightly under the YA radar, so I wanted to give it a recommendation here. And I know you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but it's just so nice. The second book that I want to recommend is called Catching Telecrow. So this book won some very prestigious awards in Australia, which is where the authors are from, and has now come over to various countries, including the UK. I think in the US it has a different title. So the story is about this Aboriginal girl who dies and her spirit stays with her father to try and help him keep going, to get over the survivor's guilt that he suffers from, and specifically to help him with a case because he is a detective. So this is one for people who are interested in the kind of magical realism realm of fantasy. Basically this girl decides that this case is pretty open and shut. It's just something to get her dad back into work again, out of this funk. But obviously, as I'm sure we've guessed, it is not the open and shut case that they think it might be. And they essentially encounter this other girl who tells them this story that sounds like it must be complete fantasy. But this fantastical tale that she spins ends up revealing some truths that are even more unsettling. It is beautifully written in this dual POV, prose and verse. So if you're also maybe looking for something which is a bit more unusual in its structure, this might be the read for you. Okay, now I wanted to give a couple of recommendations from two established YA authors in case you have missed these series that they put out a few years ago now. So the first one is Marie Lu's The Young Elites. So this is set in a fantasy world where there was this sickness that killed a lot of people that were infected by it, but those that survived ended up with these strange markings, and some of those that survived have also been said to have these mysterious powers. It's kind of a secret who has these powers, but those that do are known as the Young Elites. So these books have a few different central characters. One is one of the Young Elites. Another is someone who has been tasked with destroying the Young Elites, thinking that they pose a threat to the kingdom. And a third character who is kind of stuck between the two. There's a lot of not being sure who to trust, a lot about power, vengeance, black magic. And if you enjoy this book, it is both part of a series and also written by an author who has also written some other amazing series which are more leaning sci-fi, but if you enjoy it, then it's definitely a new author for you to check out all of her writings. And then the next author that I wanted to recommend was Sally Green. So she's written both the Half Bad series and the Smoke Thieves series. So for the Smoke Thieves, I think I'm just going to read you the 3-sentence summary that appears at the top of the back of the book, because I think this is enough to persuade you. if it's going to be your vibe. Okay. A princess, a traitor, a soldier, a hunter, and a thief. 5 teenagers with the fate of the world in their hands. 5 nations destined for conflict. I mean, so if you're looking for like an ensemble fantasy, then this might be one to try. It's got a lot of those like classic fantasy tropes, which we love to see in the genre. So things like political arranged marriages, revenge plot lines, demon hunters, all that good stuff. And then her other series starts with Half Bad. So this is essentially like a modern day fantasy set in like an alternate version of England where there are factions of witches who are fighting each other. Our main character Nathan has a parent in like each of these factions and so is kind of somewhere in the middle, which means that he is like mistrusted, mistreated, and also has been trained to kill his whole life. When his own powers start developing, he has to escape his captors and try and find his father, but he has no idea who he can trust, if he can even trust anyone. So both Half Bad and The Smoke Thieves are like mini series and trilogies. So if you're looking for like a little mini series to dig your teeth into, then they might be good options. If, however, you want a standalone book, then I'm going to recommend The Way Back. Now for this one, I'm going to read you just like a line from one of the reviews before I tell you what it's about, because I think it will give you the vibes. Steeped in the rich traditions of ghost stories and Jewish folklore, this remarkable feat of storytelling is sure to delight. That's a pretty ringing endorsement. Our 2 protagonists have only ever heard of demons as being in stories. But one day they encounter the Dark One, and it sends them on a journey to the demon land that holds the souls of the dead. This journey sees them make pacts with demons and declare war on death itself, and that's before they have to figure out their way back again. So I've been giving some recommendations of more recent releases, so now I want to give you like a classic YA fantasy recommendation, just in case you haven't read it yet, which if you haven't, like, what are you doing? Go, it's so good. And that's the His Dark Materials series by Philip Pullman. So this is a trilogy. The first is The Northern Lights, the second is The Subtle Knife, and the third is The Amber Spyglass. So generally, I think like when you read it, you'll see that the first book is about a character who's like a little younger. The second book is much more like established YA. And then the third book kind of goes up a little bit in age too. So you can absolutely like read them all as a teenager, but it's really interesting to see the characters develop. So basically, the first book is set in an alternate version of our world, kind of like back in our history, but in an alternate universe where humans have their soul like outside of their bodies in the form of what look like animals that they can communicate with called demons. It's hard to sum up these books because so much happens in them, but if I just talk about the first book, because that's like what's going to lead you into the trilogy, essentially Lyra, who's our main character, lives in this alternate version of Oxford, an alternate like college that doesn't exist in our world called Jordan College, and her friends and other kids start to go missing, and so she basically ends up trying to like rescue these children, trying to find them, but there's like so many other things going on in the background. It's so good. It's so well written. There's a reason why this is like an absolute classic of the genre. There has also been a film adaptation of the first book, which it's not considered very good, but also a BBC adaptation of like what's going to be an adaptation of the whole trilogy. And that is very good. It's got Daphne Keane in it as Lyra, who played Laura in the Wolverine movie Logan and was very good in that as well. So if you haven't checked out the series, the book and the TV show, you should just have a His Dark Materials fest and like get on both of those. Okay, I realized I hadn't actually written this one down on my list, but it would be ridiculous of me not to mention this book. So we have talked about, I feel like we've talked about it a lot on the channel, but I also feel like that's for good reason. It's Skin of the Sea by Natasha Bowen. So this is the book that has been referred to as the Black Mermaid book on TikTok, for obvious reasons. So the whole book is based on like various different like touch points of West African mythology. It's about a girl who has been tasked like living in the ocean with essentially caring for and like ferrying the souls of those who have died at sea. Except one day she doesn't do a job and instead she decides that she's going to save this boy's life. That has, you know, a lot of repercussions essentially that were not necessarily foreseen, and sets her off on this like dangerous quest to attempt to essentially like undo the mess that she has created from doing something that honestly was like a very nice thing to do. Not only have we talked about this book on this channel before, we've had Natasha, the author, on this channel a few times. So obviously go and like search for her name on our channel and you will find all the videos with her in. She's talked to us about like creating fantasy worlds and about the book itself. So definitely go check that out. It's such a good book, and she's picked some really interesting parts of like different mythologies, some creatures, and we have heard from her that there will be even more where that came from. There was some like creatures and legends and myths and stuff that she couldn't fit into the first book that didn't quite work, that are going to be making an appearance in the second, as well as us finding more about these different like creatures and myths that we had in the first one as well. My second to last recommendation is going to be another series. I don't know, maybe fantasies, I think they just work as series. I think when you've done that much like work on world building, you want to kind of explore the world a little bit. So this is The Hazel Wood by Melissa Albert. So this is the story of Alice, whose grandmother tells these very dark fairy tale stories about this like mysterious place called the Hazel Wood, which, you do you, grandma, like that's on you, except for the fact that Alice's mum goes missing, and the thing that's like taken her claims to be from the Hazelwood, that thing that her grandmother just made up and that totally isn't real. Might have to rethinking our grip on reality, Alice. So again, because this is a series, I don't want to go too much into the other books to not, spoil what happens in the first book. But essentially, if you're into this kind of like dark, disturbing, twisted fairy tale side of fantasy, this is the one to check out for you. And finally, I'm going to give a recommendation of 2 series that are going to tap into like the nostalgia side of the fantasy genre. So these are books that I read when I was like younger, but that I feel like still hold up today. So that is Lockwood Co and Artemis Fowl. So I'm sure you've already heard of both of these series, but just in case you haven't, Artemis Fowl is basically the story of like a child genius who lives in like ostensibly our world. He's like mega rich. His family is this like very wealthy criminal like mastermind family. He himself is very much followed in those footsteps. He is in fact, I'm sorry, we've just been interrupted by one of my kittens, Ichabod, who's decided that he wants to come and talk about books. Excuse me, sir, if you would just like to, you're going to sit up there for the rest of the video? I guess he's going to sit up there for the rest of the video. Have you read Artemis Fowl? Okay, where was I? He's a criminal mastermind. And he has discovered that there is a hidden world, like within our world, of magical creatures, specifically of like fairies. And he, being a criminal mastermind, finds this out and is like, I'm still their gold. So essentially it's the story of this like very abrasive anti-hero villain, Artemis Fowl, I guess. He is kind of a villain for a lot of these books. Who is essentially trying to steal the gold of just like normal, fairies trying to mind their own business. And the final recommendation is Lockwood Co. So this is a series about a world in which it's kind of like very similar to our world, like historic version of our world, where ghosts are real. They've appeared, except it's only like everyone can be affected by them, but it's only kids and teenagers who can see/sense them. And so there's a lot of these like organizations and companies that have been created that have ended up using like kids and teenagers as workers to try and essentially, get rid of them. And Lockwood Co is the only organization which is run entirely by young people. And so it's essentially like looking at all of the different cases that they go on, as well as these more like overarching stories of them and their friendships and relationships together. Okay, so that is my list. I would love to hear if you have any fantasy YA recommendations. Please leave them in the comments. If you don't have recommendations, but you are looking for more books to read because the list that I just gave you was not enough, I guess also check out the comments to see what other people have commented. I'm going to leave, as I said before, links to all of the books that I've talked about today in case you want to check them out. And if you've read any of them already, then please let us know. We would love to hear your thoughts. And as always, remember to subscribe to this channel, Penguin Platform, for more bookish videos like this one.